Hello, hello. We have lots of folks here, which is always wonderful. And I would really love to begin with a tribute to dear Lino. So I can say for myself how much, I mean, not as much as Jane, and how much I love Lino. He's such a good man. You know, when you get a good man who has longevity, that's as good as it gets. Sheldon lived to 85, Lino to 91 plus. Jane, go ahead. Why don't you go ahead, Jane, and speak?
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. And it's wonderful to see longtime friends, really longtime friends. I'm talking about 40 years plus. Bill, Bob, Lenny, and many of the rest of you. As many of you know, Lino passed on to the other side, to the spirit world on December 20th. And he passed away at home very peacefully. And he had no disease, but he was, for the past year, after an accident with his leg, slowly declining in vitality. And I always say he just used up his incredible hyperactive vitality. An endocrinologist told him when he was 50, very few men live beyond 50 with your overactive glands. I believe he had overactive glands because he was a survivor. He was a survivor of World War II. He fought with the partisans at age 10 against the Nazis and was shot at many times and survived, and literally was a runner for the partisans, a young soccer player. Thankfully, he told me all his stories before he passed on, and I recorded them. And then the communists who came after were worse, if you can believe it, at least to him and his family. And he was imprisoned and brutally beaten twice. He's a survivor and miraculously came to America and finally found freedom. He loved America. America loved him so much he was rushed into the army before he was a citizen and served in Korea. But Lino even relished his military time and survived that. And yet was not well. He was suffering anxiety, and they did not talk about PTSD at that time in the 60s, and sought help from psychiatrists and psychologists and doctors. He was jumping out of his skin. Then one day at the Port Authority in New York, where he was living, he found a book called You Are All Sampaku, which is an odd thing for a man to pick up at the bus station. He was enthralled with this book and read it and became determined to find out about macrobiotics. He searched everywhere. He asked the police, he asked the Chamber of Commerce. Nobody had heard about it. Then a coworker suggested he go to the Cauldron. I'm telling this story because many of you are from the New York City area and you know the early history. He finally found the diet that worked for him. And since 1967, he's just been totally dedicated to the diet, the philosophy, to his dear teachers, Micho and Evelyn Kushi, Herman and Cornelia Ahara, Shizuko Yamamoto, and Noboru Muramoto. He has met with me, I joined him in 1981, the most wonderful people in the world. Ganat's an example. Many of you here in the gallery are examples. We had adventures, teaching people how to be well naturally. how to help the earth
now?
and its ecology, which
Yeah.
Bill and Marlene Tara are very, very dedicated to. And all of us in macrobiotics are dedicated to a healthier world as well, and humanity for animals. He loved the diet. I said, Lino, you're a millet porridge miso soup breakfast guy, and he loved it, and he relished it, and he was eating well and chewing well up until the last day. Let me say that his quantity of food had reduced, and but his ability to walk remained with him. He was cognizant. And that day on December 20th, we were getting ready to have a checkup. I wanted to be sure we were still in tune with his physician at the VA, who always did checkups. And as a wife, I felt that I should get another opinion. He was putting on his shoes, getting dressed, and he simply exhaled and leaned forward. I was thankfully next to him, and I couldn't revive him, and he had no pulse. And many of you, if not most of you, or all of you, have been with loved ones as they passed, or have had dear, loving family members or friends who have passed on. Going through this and reading tributes to Lino, such as Ganot wrote, and Bill and others of you, there's Martin Halsey, I see, people wrote the most amazing, heartwarming tributes to Lino. We have a visiting dog here this morning. Perhaps you'd let me just quickly let her in. It'll be a little quieter. Here's a picture of Lino. I'm sorry, I can't see myself. I don't know if you can see Lino. Can you see Lino, Ganot?
There it is. Yeah, try again.
Okay. Okay. Is that a good place? Okay. I'll be 1 second. I just want to reduce my dog's stress here. Just a second. Okay, come in. For heaven's sakes. Okay.
And I'll just say while we're waiting for the doggy, is that anyone else who would like to speak briefly is more than welcome. We'd love to have you give your tributes and memories.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Jane.
I'm just very grateful for all of you who are dedicated to helping the world be healthier, to share with friends, to write. We have many writers here in the audience and very dedicated to macrobiotics and health, the plant-based diet. I call macrobiotics the original plant-based diet. It's and it's so uniquely balanced. I won't go into all that now. I just want to say that it's what we've dedicated our lives to. Lino loved people. He loved life. He got up every day early, ready to go, doing his qigong out in the grass, barefooted, and just savoring every minute of life. And it was a privilege to be with him, and it's a privilege to be with you today. So thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Do we have others who would like to say a few words? Erica, I see you here. Anybody?
Hi. I just
Yeah,
wanted to say,
Ellen.
Jane, I'm very sorry. And you both meant a lot to me through the years. Sorry. You wonderful, both of you wonderful people. Yeah, he was funny. Okay. Thank you.
Mike?
Take care of yourself, please.
Yeah, I'll be happy to tell the story of Lino at the cauldron, because I asked him how it was that he found his way to macro some years ago. And
Mike, can we see you?
yeah,
Can you-
there you go. And he told the story. He was working uptown, mid Manhattan, as the maitre d' at a fancy place, Park Avenue, Madison Avenue. You know the picture. And there was an opening at Abacera's Cauldron, and he came downtown. I think the Cauldron was 4th Street, something like that, East Side, Lower East Side. And he came downtown, still dressed in his tuxedo, in his tuxedo, and he came, to interview with Abacera, and to take the position. And I said, you were planning to become the maitre d' at the Cauldron? He said, no, the pastry chef.
That's great.
Yeah.
Who else? Yeah, just a few words.
So, dear Lino, I thought he was going to live forever. He had such a big energy, big, beautiful energy. He was always smiling. I don't ever think I saw him frown. He had such positive energy. So we're going to miss him a lot.
Yeah, he was a real source of energy, right? Really an incredible, energetic person. You know, he really threw himself into it, and he was his commitment was so total. I really admire that. He had total commitment to his beliefs, and he held through it. You know, and good on him. He made positive change in a lot of people's lives.
And a great commitment to the macrobiotic movement. Huh?
Mm.
Like all of us. Who else?
Hmm.
Who else? Don't be shy.
Well, I didn't know Lino all that well. I'd met him several times over the years. One of the qualities that I remember fondly was the booming quality of his voice, which had such a deep resonance. As if he were always speaking from the heart, and his entire body would vibrate when he would speak. And as you were saying, Erica, it was matched by the always smiling countenance. In my limited association with him, I never saw him show a fit of temper or terseness. He was always a very generous spirit. And I do appreciate his contribution, and he will indeed be missed.
Marcia, Kezia, just a hi, Lino. Hey,
Are you talking to Marcia Reisman?
yes,
You're not?
yes, I am. Can you show yourself?
I can't.
Oh,
I disappeared. Anyway, yeah, so this is Marcia Reisman, and I dearly loved Lino, and I dearly loved Jane, and was fortunate enough to spend a lot of time with both of them. And I just remember all the walks that Lino and I and Jane went on. They had a cat named Velvet, and Velvet liked to go run on the ice on the little lake that we lived at River Knoll. And I just have such incredible fond memories. And he was a powerhouse, absolutely. And I'll miss him dearly. Thank you.
Kezia. Kezia, say hi to me, if not to Lino.
Hi, hello.
Hello. Alex.
Hi. I didn't know Nino very well. I attended one of his lectures at French Meadows Camp, And it was a powerful lecture, and as Bob was saying, very strong. But the thing that I loved in that lecture, was it something he told me about twice, how during the war, I think it was his father, told everybody, we're starving to death or something like this, but you got to learn to chew the water. I don't know if anybody's heard that, but I never will forget that. And I see Ellen has heard that. Okay, then I was very touched by the whole thing, and blessings to him.
Going once, going twice.
Yes, this is Carol, and I knew Lino and Jane over the years, and especially, kept in contact with Jane in the last few years recently, and we chatted. And Lino, again, everything that everyone has said about him, he leaves a legacy of inspiration for us. His positive attitude, all the things that he survived are phenomenal. And I salute and honor the relationship that Jane and Lino had, the love that is there. Every time you saw them, they were just enjoying each other and loving each other. And that's another brilliant example for us of a great relationship. So he gave many healing words and lectures. I too heard the Chew Water story in the past, and I give you all our love, Jane. We're there for you. We love you. We support you. And I know Grace Goldberg has been talking about Lino ever since, we heard the news. And on this call, and most calls, she doesn't have a camera or the facility to speak, but I know I speak for her as how much she loved Lino and loves Jane. So I send best regards from Grace Goldberg. Thank you. And thank you, Ganat, for having this. And thank you, Jane, for coming to us in this way. We love you. God bless.
So unless someone is quick, then I'll ask Lenny to give his remarks. Lenny Jacobs.
Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Nice to see you and see some old friends, new friends. And my experience with Lino was when he appeared in Boston in, I don't know, 1970 or 71. He went by the name of Lenny, and there already was a Lenny there. Actually, there was a Leonard Carmody who was there, who Bill knows, and I was the second Leonard, but I became Lenny, although Micha had a hard time saying Rennie. And then Lenny Stanchich showed up. And I think he took that Americanized name because he felt like people wouldn't know what a Lino was. But not long afterward, he became Lino Stanchich. And like many people, I had a close relationship with him and a lot of admiration for him. One of the things about Lino was that we all studied, everybody here studied macrobiotics on some way and tried to apply the principles and the practices to our life. And there were a lot of problems that people discovered that were not equal to what the dream, the ideal of the practice was going to be. Lino, like a few others, actually exemplified what it would be to be really macrobiotic. He was a big guy. He was bigger than life. He sometimes spoke louder than we wanted. His hands were larger than anyone else's. And he lived like we had expected we would all live with a large life. And many people didn't discover the reality of the kind of the message, the propaganda or the teachings were not always equal to the experience that people had, or the health, or the vitality, or the positivity. And there are a few people who actually lived the life. And you know, I got Bill right in the front of my screen here. Here's another man who's living the life and not just talking about it, but doing it. And Lino was another one, and Martin was another one. I don't know all the rest of you, but Lino was somebody who actually did more than talk about it. He did it, and his life was an example of it. And his ability to exemplify what it meant to be the, not, I wouldn't say free of any kind of beliefs, but he was actually living up to the level of what our dreams were or are. And the other thing that I think somebody else just said is that we never thought of in the past 40 years of Lino or Jane. It was always Lino and Jane, or Jane and Lino. And without Jane, I don't know that Lino would have become as successful and as healthy and as positive as he has been, as he was, as he is in our minds. And we appreciate Jane's contribution to the Jane Lino story and to the Lino abilities. Really, Jane, we appreciate your providing structure, nourishment, both dietary as well as emotional, that this was a man who really had unbounded energy and was all over. And then he started settling down with Jane, and it was hard. Nobody believed he was going to pick just one. And he picked one, and he picked the right one. So congratulations to you, and we appreciate your support of him and your support of our shared dream of a large life, a big life, a free life, a life that exemplified what we expected macrobiotics could provide for all of us. So I know that there will be more stories, and Jane is going to try to execute some type of, I don't know, digital or print version of some of the stories and the photos and the her memories and Lino's descriptions of the kinds of things that he's done with his life. For today, we're going to talk about my discoveries about macrobiotics through the publishing of this magazine that has long since vanished from the daily world, but still in some of our memories, East West Journal. That East West Journal started in 1971, and at the same time that the magazine was beginning, I was helping to launch what was then called the Large Sinai, the Big Sinai, the second macrobiotic restaurant in Boston. There was another macrobiotic restaurant in Cambridge, but this was one of the Kushi enterprises, and eventually became called the Seventh Inn. And it opened in 1971 at the same time that East West Journal started. And I joined the magazine in 1973 when some of the key staff resigned. I was at Micho's house. Some friends and I, we were going to start a domestic seaweed business. And we were talking about harvesting seaweed off the north shore of Massachusetts and the southern shore of Maine, and selling it to Erewhon. And I was talking to Micho that evening when several people came in and said that the key staff of East West Journal had resigned and they were going to start a new magazine. And so Micho said, well, I know you've got the seaweed business going, but how would you like to come and work at East West Journal now? And I had never been in the publishing world. I had never really focused on journalism. I had been a school teacher and was working on developing a seaweed business. I never had any background in that either. So I took the challenge, and from 1973 until 1989, I worked and eventually was the publisher of East West Journal. And that was the period, if some of you were there or or have read the history, when macrobiotics made it on the map domestically in Massachusetts, in Boston, in North America, and in Europe. Japan already had, and France and some of Portugal already had some macrobiotic centers, but really this was the launching period of macrobiotics worldwide. Whatever it meant, everybody had a different connotation. What was macrobiotics? The marriage of East and West, a diet of brown rice, answer to people's serious illnesses. This is the time when there were documented cases of incredible, miraculous recoveries of cancer. Anthony Sadalero, Gene Kohler, Norman Arnold, they were all these remarkable stories that really amazed and inspired people. However, it kind of went toward a diet to prevent or heal cancer rather than the diet to make a large life, or a large life that included a type of balanced diet. And so what had been kind of a system of integrating ideas and reality with principles and guidelines became a standard macrobiotic diet to prevent or cure cancer. And the business that many teachers and so-called senior teachers found themselves with was working with very sick people. And AIDS became, another primary focus target of macrobiotic healing. We could cure AIDS. We could cure cancer. And it was exciting. And it was also exasperating because, again, the reality and the teaching were not always in alignment. What people did in their private lives was not always what they said in their public life. Walking the talk and living the life and actually achieving the dream was difficult and sometimes contradictory and sometimes hypocritical. And it was frustrating to see the teaching and the teachers espousing something that they couldn't do themselves, or promising something that often didn't work or didn't work for themselves. And I'll explore a few of those because there were some in about, I don't know, maybe it was 1985, 86, when Micho called a few of his close friends or so-called senior teachers who were in the area. It said, somebody's coming over to my house. And he was living at Buckminster Road at the time. And he would like to meet some macrobiotic teachers. Put on your best clothes and come over to my house. This was a Sunday afternoon at about noon. And I don't know, 5, 6, 7 of us came over dressed with our neckties on and nice suits. And in walked this man, Norman Arnold, who had been diagnosed with terminal cancer and had been given up by everybody. His doctor said he wouldn't live more than 6 months. He was living in South Carolina and he had twin sons. He was Jewish and he said, I just want to live long enough to attend their bar mitzvah. He met through some connections, Becky Cannon and her then husband, Noki Kubota, who had already started providing some macrobiotic healing for him. And he said, but I need to go to the source. And so he went to see Micho, but he couldn't get a flight that day. So he chartered a plane to fly up to Boston from South Carolina to attend a consultation session with Micho. And when he walked in, we were all standing there, and he was almost in tears because he was sure that he was going to die and he was never going to make it to his son's bar mitzvah. And the first thing that Micho said was, no problem. Yes, is no problem. Why are you worried? You're fine. You're going to be okay. And it was the first time somebody had given him a positive prognosis. And in fact, he lived another 10, 15, maybe 20 years and survived pancreatic cancer. It was incredible. And this was a man who ate brown rice. This was not one of the keto cures of cancer. He was on maybe not the standard macrobiotic diet, what was then, who knew what it was, but he was on a diet that was very restrictive, sure was low calories, like Dr. Yu suggests, but it was also high in carbohydrates, high in complex carbohydrates. I'm sure it was very low in refined carbohydrates. I don't think the man ate any refined sugar, but I know that he came back to Boston many times over the next few years and was a key part of the Kushi Foundation. There was then the East West Foundation, and he encouraged Micho to create the Kushi Foundation so that it would not be co-opted by other people who would want to call it East West this or that. It was identified with Micho Kushi. And Norman was, in any case, a remarkable example of dietary approach. Now, I'm sure there were other things that Norman did, and certainly Micho's confidence and encouragement that he could be healed, that he could be cured, that he could be recovering his basic health and not have this painful early demise. It was remarkable. So that was certainly one, and I'm sure many of you also know the story of Anthony Sadalero, who was, as
I'd
the
like to
director of.
tell, I'd like to
Okay.
interrupt and tell my
Please.
experience with Norman Arnold. Sheldon and I, my husband, were traveling in a motorhome around the US. And when we got to South Carolina, of course, we wanted to look up Arnold. And I was writing a book of recoveries. And I called up to interview him. And he said, I have neither time nor inclination. What is it you want? And I tried to explain, well, and forget it, no good. So a couple of days went by, I called again, I'm young. And this time I asked to speak to his wife, and I told him what I was doing. I was writing a book, and she said, y'all come right down. And we went to his house, and Arnold greeted us very warmly. We had a wonderful experience with him. And he told us what he was eating, which was brown rice, Dookie beans, the 9 yards and everything, and some schnapps here and there he would take. And he didn't have a gas stove in his kitchen. So he got a motorhome and he backed it up right to the back door of his house, and he cooked everything in the motorhome and then brought it back into the house. He was, talk about a remarkable person. He was quite something. I'll always remember that.
That's a great story. His schnapps, I'm sure, came also out of the back of his truck because he was actually he made his fortune as a liquor distributor through the Southeast, South Carolina and beyond. And so it wasn't like he was a man who was out there selling brown rice and seaweed as his business. He was selling whiskey and very successfully at that. But in any case, that was he was a stubborn individual. He was hard, strong-willed, and he spoke his mind. And he recovered. I don't know how many years that was, not after he was diagnosed.
No, I don't know. He said
Anyhow,
when
I
he
think
wanted to begin, he sent his lawyer. He said, I don't know what this macrobiotics is. And he asked his lawyer to go check out Micho before he went himself.
I didn't know that, but it was 10 to 20 years past his diagnosis of 6 months to live that he lived. And Gene Kohler, I don't remember what the name of his book was, but he was a professor at music at Ball State University in Indiana, and he recovered from pancreatic cancer also. So anyhow, there are certainly some remarkable cases. Now,
Lenny, before you begin again, I
please.
wanted to mention because you mentioned Tony Stadalero's name. Lino was his last counselor, and I scribed for him when Lino saw Tony, and he had gone into remission and was in remission for many years. And then as a doctor, he couldn't believe that it was as simple as the food that he ate that made a difference in his condition. And he started experimenting on himself again. He started eating chicken in particular, I remember. And it brought, not the chicken, but he got cancer again for a second time. I think it was in his kidneys, if I remember. And Lena was the one who had to talk with him and explain to him, what was going on. So that's one of the things I do remember about Lino.
One of the regular authors for East West Journal during the more of the 80s than the 70s was an American man who had been living in Japan, and he was teaching in Sendai at the university. His name is John Stevens, and he was a real adventurous individual who traveled extensively in Japan, and he was writing books, and often an excerpt of the book or a separate article before the book was published at East West Journal. John Stevens was from Chicago, but he went to Japan on a fellowship, and he never left after 35 years. And he had he studied with one of Ueshiba. He studied with Ueshiba Aikido in Tokyo, but then he also studied extensively with one of his primary students. And he had a dojo at his university in Sendai, and was a very effective Aikido teacher. John developed cancer, and when I talked to him about diet, he said, "I'm not a diet person. I like Japanese food, but I'm not about changing my diet for some kind of healing thing. I am not a diet person. I don't look at cancer as my enemy. Cancer is my best Aikido training partner. And so I'm looking at the cancer as a way that I can understand myself and work with this and not try to conquer it." In Aikido, we don't try to conquer our opponent. We try to make friends with it, and we try to work with it, and we work with its energy, and we redirect the energy so that we're both satisfied with the results of our life. And it was a refreshing approach to not looking at cancer as the bad invader that is destroying our life, but as part of our life that we need to interact with, a yin-yang approach rather than a yin against yang or yang against yin. Any case, that was a refreshing approach for me to learn that cancer is not necessarily what our efforts are to eradicate, but it's part of our life that we want to learn to play with, to, I don't know, spar with, joust with, dance with. And it's really a way to embrace this. And Norio Kushi, although I don't want to get into that, but he has a similar approach. He calls it his friend, his companion. He doesn't feel he's cured of cancer. He's still working with that. In the early 80s in Boston, the macrobiotic teachers, including Micho and Aveline, were encouraging a reduction of animal food. And this is not about veganism. This was to be spiritually elevated. It's important, according to the teaching of the time, to minimize the consumption of animal food, especially for children. And this was a regular part of the public and private teachings that macrobiotic teachers were providing. And a number of, and of course, as most of you know, the macrobiotic families were growing in size, and it was encouraged. The more children, the more it expresses your health, and the better it is for the future as macrobiotics people become the prophets for the new world. So there were a lot of children being born, And there were a lot of children consuming very little animal food, or if they were nursing, their mothers were eating very little animal food. And surprisingly, the children seemed to be really mellow. And it was a common statement among the parents that, wow, my kid almost never wakes up at night. They're not screaming, they're not crying, they don't seem to be annoyed. They're really more and more mellow, until the mellowness became like an example of a lack of maturity, a lack of development. They didn't start standing, they didn't start walking, their talking was delayed. And a couple of them were concerned enough that they went to a doctor. Now, with those days, we looked at modern medicine as an example of the worst that the West has developed. Modern medicine is killing our kids, as opposed to macrobiotics is killing our kids. But a few people went to the doctor and discovered that there was a B12 deficiency in the blood of these children who had a delayed development. B12 deficiencies was very rare in civilized countries, and especially in the United States. They were shocked, and they questioned them about their diet. And they were encouraged immediately to give them Carter's little liver pills, which is something like from the 50s. Nobody had ever thought about Carter's little liver pills, but they were it was cod liver oil, and it was extremely high doses of B12. And people came to East West Journal, and we were, aware of what the community was dealing with, and we wanted to write an article about B12 and what's the issue, what is it used for in the body. We were told that it takes years for there to be a deficiency of B12, 3 or 4 years, because it's stored in the liver. It's not a fat soluble vitamin, but it is stored in the liver, and it takes a long time for deficiencies to show up. So I went to Michio and I asked him, what do you think about this? Is there something that we should be thinking about and writing about and sharing with people? He said, the problem is people are washing their hijiki too long. They're letting it soak and they're pouring out the soaking water. And that's the problem. There's not enough time using the water from the hijiki. And that's where the B12 is lacking. It was like shocking. There is no B12 in hijiki. There's no B12 in the soaking water of hijiki. There's arsenic in hijiki, and throwing out the soaking water, like throwing out the soaking water of brown rice, is a good thing to do to minimize the arsenic. And so we did some research. We wrote an extensive article about B12, the pros and cons of the animal food in the diet and other sources of it. People had thought that tempeh was a source of B12 because B12 was listed as one of the the nutritional benefits of tempeh on the packages, because those nutritional studies were done in Indonesia, where tempeh was traditionally made. And tempeh, as an inoculated soybean mixture, was wrapped with banana leaves. And so the bacteria that inoculated, that added to the conversion of the soybeans to tempeh, added B12. But in the hygienic kitchens where tempeh is made commercially, there's no chance for any strains of another kind of bacteria to get in with, and there's no B12 in the tempeh sold in the United States. If you make it at home, depending on how you make it, you might have B12. Micho was not only once, but he was very angry at this article, but he didn't write a letter to the editor. But this was one of the examples I've like. And I think somebody said recently, I think there was a study in the Netherlands also about B12 and among macrobiotic children. And when Micho was questioned again about that, he denied that that was a real situation, although there were several children who had irreversible neurological damage based on a B12 deficiency that had gone on for too long. And I'm not quite sure what the long-term effects were, but I know on the short term, it was easily reversed by changing their diet or just using supplements. This is not to say that either I or East West Journal was against the vegan diet. We were only recognizing that with a strict vegan diet and no supplementation, there's a risk for children at least, and maybe adults as well, to have B12 deficiencies. Anyhow, that was one of the more alarming discoveries, that the teaching and the reality was so rigid that it wouldn't flex to just it wasn't like a scientific study. These were children who were very weak, who discovered B12 deficiencies, and B12 supplements reversed their conditions very rapidly. Within a week, they started having more. Not that they would cry more, but they were just developing in a normal way. Anyhow, there is one example that was disturbing to me. And Ganat wanted me to talk about John and Yoko, and that was the kind of the headline of the talk today. And it was an interesting meeting with John and Yoko. This was again, I don't know when this was, late 70s, early 80s in Boston, and it was another case where Micho, and it was really Micho, not Aveline or one of the kids, who called and said, "You've got to come over tonight. We're having dinner, and John Lennon is coming. Dress it as best you can. Dress up, because you want to give a good impression to John and Yoko." John and Yoko were not high fashion people. They were high, high presence, and certainly celebrities of the high level. As you know, Bill Dufty, Sugar Blues and You're All Sampaku author, had met and eventually married Gloria Swanson. And Gloria was in Boston doing a show in downtown Boston. I don't remember what the theater was. She had a part in a theater. Maybe she was a leading star, and she was friends with Yoko and John. And she invited them to come up to see her show. And Yoko and John had been together, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. She had been trying to get pregnant, and she had had several miscarriages. And Gloria said to Yoko, "You've got to meet this guy, Kushi. I'm sure he's going to be able to help you get pregnant and keep the baby through full term." And so she was skeptical, Japanese woman, and skeptical that there was a Japanese teacher in America who was going to give her advice. She was already a successful artist and also the wife of one of the more successful Beatles. So that's why they were coming over, and Micho and Aveline wanted to make a dinner party for them, and Yoko really wanted to talk to Micho and get advice from him. What could she do so that she could go full term and have a baby? So I remember Alex Jack and Ed Esco, maybe Sherman Goldman. I'm not sure if Sherman was there or not, and a couple other people who were living at Takushi's house, and we all we were dressed up with suits and neckties, and John was in his blue jeans and a t-shirt, very relaxed. I mean, he was comfortable dressed, however he wanted, including nude, in the famous photo by Annie Leibovitz. But he was so shy, and we were so dumbfounded that get him into conversation. He had very little interest in brown rice, miso soup, or yin and yang. If we wanted to talk music or about some of the other celebrities he knew, I'm sure he would have had something to say, but he was kind of intimidated because he thought that we were some kind of like examples of some kind of new movement, and he wasn't sure if it was a cult or if it was going to be the answer to their prayers. But he was very shy. It was surprising how hard it was to get him in conversation. Meanwhile, Yoko wanted to hear about her health and get recommendations for her diet, and Micho wanted to talk philosophy with her. He was really interested in her application of her art to her studies, whether it was Zen or whatever else she had studied in her background in Japan as well as in the States. And so he wanted to talk philosophy. She wanted to talk diet. John was afraid to talk about anything. And what really warmed up the room, Micho took out a camera. And Japanese are famous for taking photos, but I had never seen Micho hold a camera before, let alone take photos. And he got us all to pose with John, with Yoko, with his kids. And his kids were really fascinated. They were really impressed. His father had really made it big time because he had one of the Beatles come over. Of course, he wasn't in the Beatles anymore, but that was there were photos for years on the mantelpiece at the Buckminster Roadhouse of John and Yoko with the Kushi kids. And Norio tells the story slightly differently. His memory of it is different in his book, but my memory of it was that they came so that she could discover a practice, a diet, a method to go full term with her pregnancy. And I think that son's name, is it Sean? Sean, the son that she had?
Yeah.
I think so. And I think that was I don't know whether she attributed the successful birth to the Micho and macrobiotics, but that was an exciting time, and it was sort of a historical event for the merging of East and West, and macrobiotics having a real value in pregnancy, fertility, and successful healthy birth of a child. We at East West Journal also published excerpts from there was this early macrobiotic couple who I know Bill knew, Nahum and Beverly Stiskin, who were early students of the Kushis in Boston. And I'm not sure where Nahum, I think Nahum may have come from New York also. Beverly was from New York City. And they were early pioneers in Japan, studying macrobiotics in Japan. And while they were there, they started their book publishing company called Autumn Press. And it was Autumn Press that did the first book of miso, the book of tofu, the book of tempeh. And I feel like those books and our excerpts of their material in East West Journal were key to introducing those foods to the American cuisine, and maybe American, European, non-Asian cuisine. And the American Miso Company that started by the Bellamy's and Sandy Pukel and Micho and Aveline in the Asheville area, and is now owned by Great Eastern Sun. I think last year, I think they sold 1 million pounds of miso made in the Asheville area, primarily in North America. So, and of course, there's other sources of miso worldwide, but and tofu, of course, is just a standard part of Western cuisine as opposed to just the Asian cuisine. And it was really, I attribute the benefit of that. Bill Shurtleff wrote the books, and Autumn Press published the books, and East West Journal excerpted those articles from their books that were really instrumental in introducing these healthful, novel, imaginative foods to the West. So it was another one of these East-West synthesis, complementary opposites, I guess we could say, is soybeans were so prevalent, and I don't know how, they were mainly hog and cattle food, maybe more hog food than cattle food, instead of being consumed by humans in their digestible form. And at one point, we were exporting American soybeans to Asia for Muso Company, who was giving them to their suppliers because the soybeans grown in the United States were a higher quality than were grown in Japan. And in those days, Japan didn't want to do business with China for their food products. They didn't trust the quality. And so we were exporting our soybeans And I'll put in a small plug that there still is a source of natto and mochi from that era. There's the husband of Aveline's sister, Yoko. This was not Yoko Ono, but Yoko Kendall. She and Charlie Kendall started a company making natto, amasaki, and mochi, and he still continues. She passed away a few years ago, but Charlie is still making natto, and it's probably the best natto available in the United States. And it wasn't something that we wrote about in East West Journal, but it is another way of eating soybeans in a digestible form that provides an amazing amount of nutritional value. So you can look them up if you're interested in Kendall Foods. So what else? Do you want to ask any questions? Should I just continue, Ganat? How would you like to? I can continue with stories. I can tell positives, negatives, controversial ones. I'll tell one other one. I interviewed.
Okay, and I also am just wondering if Bill has anything to say about the vegetarian babies.
Well, yeah, clarification. Two things. One is in 81, the study was actually done at Harvard by Harvard students anyway, the B12 thing, Lenny. I don't remember. It was from friends of Larry Cushy, people that he had made contact with, and they did B12 studies on households in Brookline, and I think in Jamaica Plains as well. And there were absolutely some serious cases of B12 deficiency. They were very few, though, because I was managing the Cushy Foundation at that time. They had to clear everything through us, and we saw the results of the thing. So it's a minor point, but the major point is this: that was not a vegan diet that people were following, and so I want to be really clear with people. That was a poorly practiced macrobiotic diet, right? Not a vegan diet. People weren't aware of the implications of what they were doing, which was terrible. And it was even worse in Belgium and Holland, where one of the universities there did a very large study and found a lot of children with B12 deficiency. So the bottom line was that Micho and Aveline really didn't understand anything about nutrition. That's an important point to make. The foods like tempeh, for instance, have a substance in them which are an analog of B12, but they don't operate the same way in the body. And if it's a poor analysis of the food, it shows up as being B12, and it's not B12. It's an analog, and so a lot of problems happen around there. But to call it a vegan diet, I think, is a mistake, because people were eating just a very haphazard, throw together thing. It was the diets were very, very restrictive. I mean, people weren't eating many vegetables, period. Not that would have solved the B12 problem, but I'm saying that the diets were very deficient diets. And so I think that, what we understand now and what we understood then, actually, Bill Spear, Denny Waxman, and I all went to Micho and Aveline and said, you've got to do something about this B12 thing. And it went where it went. It went out into the universe, as we say in macrobiotics. But so it wasn't that there was not any acknowledgement of it within the community and within the community of teachers. And there was a lot of bad practice, what I would just call bad practice, limited practice. I made another note here, but it's irrelevant. We'll go on. I'd rather hear your stories than go on with it, right? There was one.
Well, just to clarify.
Oh, I was going to say, Yoko Ono actually knew about macrobiotics. She had been going to a macrobiotic restaurant in London for years before she met John Lennon. And so Greg and Craig Sams could give anybody the background on that. But when they had their first little macrobiotic restaurant in London, Yoko Ono was one of the people that went there. It was a very kind of in place for people in the arts, music and art. and she used to go there before she knew. So I think she was aware of macrobiotics anyway, you know. So she may have certainly she was aware of Micho. You know what she was doing about that. I have no idea. I don't know anything about that. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks. Just to be clear, I don't think, I hope that I didn't sound like I was being critical or judgmental, and nor would I think that they were on a vegan diet. These were people though who had been restricting their animal food consumption, and when Micho was asked about it, he said they're washing their hijiki too much.
Yeah, he was totally off. But it was another one was that you know, one of the women was drinking too much mineral water, you know, like bubbly water, you know, Perrier or something like that. I mean, so there was just a lot of crackpot stuff going on there, you know, which was very, very unfortunate. But there were balancing agencies in there, you know. So I don't know. I think people have a tendency to overinterpret promises without using any critical thinking, and I think this is the basis of any problem that we may have in macrobiotics. If people want to accept everything in without any critical thinking, of course they're going to get in trouble. It doesn't make any difference whether it's politics or religion or nutrition. I mean, there's got to be critical thinking involved in some way, and it's interesting for me because sometimes when I hear people talk about, oh, macrobiotics did this or macrobiotics do that, I feel like I was on another planet. You know, I mean, really, I mean, people say, no, the teacher told me to do this, you know, or the teacher told me to do that. And I think, what the hell? And you believed it? That's really, you know, for all the respect I have for Micho, he was really cockamamie sometimes, you know, I mean, just the man from outer space. He had a lot of crackpot ideas, right?
And he often said he was from outer space.
Well, yeah, that too. You know, I mean, you probably remember the whole thing about it in case of an atomic attack, having the capes that were different colors, like tinfoil on one side and black on the other, so that it would reflect out the blast and then absorb the radiation. I mean, Jesus, there were stories like, I think, wow, man, we're really out there. You know, we all got to get a tin hat. Right?
Sylvia has a comment. Sylvia, you want to unmute?
Okay. Comment number one. In 1979, there was a research project with the macrobiotic group in Boston. The last name of the researcher was Dwyer, D-W-Y-E-R, and that documented no B12 deficiency in the group as of that time.
Nope, wrong. It did.
So, number two, in the late 80s and early 90s, we did testing on foods using a protozoan that cannot be tricked by analog B12. It showed for Seth Tibbetts, Turtle Island soy tempeh, very remarkable levels of true non-analog B12. And nori has been consistently, by the vitamin B12 project, as well as many other projects, documented as containing the actual vitamin. Micho was saying people should have a sheet of nori a day. Herman was saying, no, this is a red algae. It's 2 yin for eating in large quantities. But it did contain the actual vitamin, not the analog. And the conclusion that my project came to was that people were not eating adequate salt because the chloride in the salt was necessary to digest the proteins to which the vitamin was bound. And well, we'll leave it at that. Not enough chloride. And to get chloride, you need sodium chloride, which is salt. So people were not digesting. People were becoming very thin because they weren't digesting. And the women especially would be very happy at being very thin, but it wasn't a healthy condition. So I'll leave that there. Oh, last thing, we did testing on foods. We had the lab in California go out and buy the animal foods randomly from the supermarket. And when the first test results came back on 3 items for which we knew the correct amounts, B12, at the time the vitamin was initially discovered, and dozens of foods were tested using the protozoan Acromonas malhamensis. We knew what the findings should be, and these samples showed 0. Vitamin B12, 0. And the lab held back the results for 8 months. I waited after paying for those tests, and they put on the report that they did the test twice. The director of the lab, who was a Japanese male, told me that they had repeated at their own cost more than twice, and that they had to get new batches of Acromonas malhamensis from American Biologics because the little guys just kept dying. There was no B12 in those foods. And then the lab director told me that they had had the same test requested by someone else on hamburger, and they had gotten the same results, 0. And the lab messed everything up by copywriting the results so that I didn't feel free in a normal way to use them. But that's a different story. We retested, we did a thing between naturally raised beef heart with no antibiotics and so on in the animal's food, and commercially raised. And we came up with a finding of 2 point something for beef heart, but 0 for the commercially raised. And so it showed the difference, because when you're zapping an animal with antibiotics, you're destroying the bacteria in its gut. So actually, before the first test results came back, I knew there was 0. I'll stop now.
We could have a long conversation about B12, and I know there are quite a few different points of view about it, and maybe it's true what Micha said, that if we didn't wash our hijiki as much, we would have not had any issues with B12 deficiencies. And maybe, as Sylvia said, it's all made up and it's a myth. But this is a story about myth and magic. So let's talk about the myths and the magic. We interviewed
Lenny, there's a story by Lenny, I don't know if it's Boulanger or Boulanger, about his experience. I don't know, Lenny, if you wanted to share it, because he wrote it to me just now privately. Did you want to share your story, or would you rather keep it private? Another Lenny Boulanger or Boulanger. Are you here with us?
It's Larry, and he's got it out to everybody, not just to you.
Oh, okay, good. So Larry, do you want to speak your experience? Yeah, I said Lenny, you're right, Larry. Boulanger. Going once, going twice? Okay, perhaps, no micro camera, okay. You know what, if you don't mind, I will read it out loud. I just find it interesting.
Great.
He says,
yeah, please.
he has been macrobiotic since 1969, including routine fish. I was always extremely healthy. I was arrested in 2001 and served 13.5 years in federal prison for money laundering, and struggled to eat the most meager of chemical-free vegetarian diets without fish or whole grains or even decent veggies. I almost died before being diagnosed with B12 deficiency and started receiving monthly injections. Neurological functions only partly returned since then, and I still suffer irreversible systematic nerve damage despite all manner of supplementation. So there's a story.
So again, B12 is one of the is one of the concerns. And as a result of that study, when East West Journal was being published, and there were a lot of magazines being published. There were a lot of subscribers to magazines. There was no digital media. It was print media. And there was Vegetarian Times, there was eventually New Age Journal, and there was East West Journal. There were probably a number of other magazines that served that same population. But the advertisers wanted to reach the market that we were writing to and that we were sending our magazines to. And one of the most profitable of the advertising bases was the vitamin supplement industry. And in those days, just like the natural food companies were more independent, they weren't large corporations like Kraft or Heinz that owned all these companies, or Quaker that bought Chico-san. And so these vitamin companies all wanted their brand to be established, identified, and they had a lot of money because they were profitable businesses. We didn't accept any ads for vitamin companies. We thought food is our best medicine. Who needs supplements when you can eat a balanced diet? And like Bill said, everybody didn't eat a balanced diet. And just like junk food vegetarians, a lot of people knew what not to eat, but they didn't know what to eat. But we had the ideal that eating a well-rounded diet that included fermented foods and seaweeds and so forth would give us everything we needed. And so we just ideologically didn't accept ads from vitamin companies. But discovering about this B12 issue made us think, okay, maybe we should open our eyes and pocketbooks, because there'd be a lot of money that we were passing up because we weren't accepting those ads. And so again, I went to see Micho. What do you think? Nope, absolutely. We don't need that. We don't want that. That is like selling out to it's like Coca-Cola. But it's not the same. You can look at the ingredients. We can pick ones that are just, even if it's a vegetarian-based capsule or a pressed tablet. Ultimately, he said, well, you make up your own mind. And we started accepting what's now referred to as orthomolecular therapies. There it is, vitamin supplementation. And we looked for the ones that really were among the best. And I feel like, and then there was, what was that? There was blue-green algae. There was something else, green magma, which was barley grass juice, freeze-dried barley grass juice. There was Ann Wigmore teaching about wheatgrass diet in Boston, and barley grass juice, green magma. That was a Japanese company. And so again, Micho introduced it and said, you should take their ads. And they spent a lot of money with us. I'm not sure what the benefits were of all those green powders, spirulina, blue-green algae, green magma. But any case, I think that the opportunity to examine, and it's again, everybody's own discovery. Some people will never take a supplement. They won't do anything. And there are people, I guess, Steve Akoff, I don't know if he's here or not, but I know he recommends what he refers to as orthomolecular supplementation. And vitamin D is certainly one of them. B12 may be for some people. Calcium might be for some people. Fish oil or flax oil for omega supplementation. So initially, Micho and Aveline kind of forbid it. Ultimately, they opened up because of the potential financial gain. Not that they were making money on it, but at least so the magazine would survive and maintain its publishing vitality. Another thing that happened that was kind of controversial was there was a woman named Julia Yamaguchi, Japanese woman, who was the daughter of Alcon Yamaguchi. Alcon was one of the students and contemporaries of George Osawa. And his brother was a very well-respected sensei in Japan who had studied with Ueshiba O-sensei, the father of Aikido. And Alcon's brother was the teacher. I don't know if anybody here knows Bill Gleason, who opened the dojo at the Kushi Institute years ago. and he's still teaching Aikido in Massachusetts, in Gloucester, Massachusetts. He studied with Alcon's brother. Alcon's daughter, Julia, worked for Eden Foods for 10 or 15 years. And she continued when she moved back to Japan, working in the organic food industry, and was one of the people involved in certifying Japanese grown food as certifiably organic. Julia said to me one time when we were talking about brown rice, she said, my father told me that George's comments to the Japanese people was, brown rice is a little bit too coarse for most people's digestive system. Yes, fiber's good, but it'd be better to have 30% polished brown rice rather than 100%. Of course, if you don't have a rice polishing machine, better to eat 100% brown than 100% white. In Japan, it's very common for people in their kitchens to have a rice polishing machine. And in some cases where there's a lot of rice being grown in Japan, you go to the co-op and you buy the rice and you hull it and polish it right at the time. And you just decide 5% up to 100% polish of the rice. And most Japanese households will eat semi-polished brown rice. In the big cities, of course, it's just white rice because it's easier to get it. You go to the store and 99.9% of the people are buying white rice. But in the country, it's very common to have partially milled, partially polished. So the polish is, I know a lot of people bought the rice and got a husking machine and took the husk off. This is not that. This is, you go to the store, you can buy Lundberg brown rice, you put it into a device that spins it and pulls off some of the bran. And I tried it and I found it, wow, this is really something. Meanwhile, we were interviewing a man named Rudolph Ballantyne, known as Rudy Ballantyne. Rudy Ballantyne was an MD who had studied Ayurvedic medicine and homeopathy in India and became a disciple of Swami Rama at the Himalayan Institute in upstate Pennsylvania. And ultimately, he opened up a number of what they were called East-West bookstores, which had nothing to do with East-West Journal or the East-West Foundation, but it was India and the West, and the interchange of philosophies, medicine, yoga, and so forth. Meditation was a key part of what they were teaching. And we went up to interview him for an article in East-West Journal. And I asked Rudy about 100% unrefined, unpolished grains. And he said, in India, there's no history of eating unpolished rice, unpolished wheat, unpolished grains. And wheat is more common than rice in a traditional diet in India. And he said they always partially sifted it. They would grind it and they had these kind of cloth and they would shake it up into the air and some of the bran would go away and what was left was partially sifted, partially polished, partially refined whole wheat. He said it's very difficult to eat 100% whole grains. Of course, I know there are a lot of people on this call who feel like that is sacrosanct. That is the sacrament. That is essential if we're going to call ourselves whole grain consuming people. But I started, I ordered from Japan a rice polishing machine. The company was Omron, O-M-R-O-N. I don't know if they still make them or not. I've since bought another one. And when I started 20 to 30% polished rice, I found, wow, my kids were happier, healthier, their digestion was better. They didn't crave other foods. Their digestion was more complete. And I did an article about it in East-West Journal. I think we called it a paler shade of brown. And I wrote about, yeah, I know, this is takeoff on the song.
Introduction.
Right. And I told this story about Julia, about Rudy Ballantyne, about my discovery in Japan, about the semi-polishing of rice. Aveline was so angry. She wrote a letter to the editor and totally contradicted it. And we published it, you know, she was entitled and she was the owner at the time. And it was a high risk to say that semi-polished brown rice. I think It may not take out all the arsenic, but I think that it takes out the arsenic as well as some of the part that makes brown rice less appealing and less appetizing and less digestible for some people. Maybe some people have an incredible healthy gut and they can get through whole grains and get the value from the fiber. But this was another serious conflict and contradiction. And I'm not sure outside of Japan how many people have discovered this, but on a recent trip to Japan, again, we found that many people in their home kitchen, it's about the size of a toaster, and you put in whole brown rice and out comes semi-polished brown rice. It was another one of those contradictions between, but did Osawa actually say it? I don't know. This is like the oral tradition. I heard it from Julia, who heard it from her father, who claims to have heard it from George.
The Kushis had a polishing machine in their kitchen because I
There-
remember
there-
it was
husking. That was for husking the rice.
Oh,
So they
okay.
bought unhusked rice. They felt at some point that this was the ultimate, to buy it unhusked and to husk it. And the fresh husked rice was apparently the key to ultimate health. Unfortunately, they were also selling that machine. And so it was hard to separate their financial interests with their health teachings. Anyhow, I know there are many comments now, so and I've already gone on for more than an hour, so I'll let you
Why
moderate.
did you buy a second rice polishing machine?
The first one stopped working, and it was much larger. It was about the size of a large juicer. And the new one, and I bought it on Amazon, and it was less money, and it's quieter and smaller.
What's the brand of it?
I don't remember, but it's all in Japanese. So you need Google Translate. You can get it. But if you just look up rice polishing on Amazon US, it comes from Japan.
Okay.
Oh, here's another Lino story for you. Lino used to have sessions where we would make our brown rice and then sit down and chew it 100 times. And the rice definitely tasted different when you chew it 100 times. In fact, on a number of occasions, my heart would start racing out of my chest. It became so sweet. So I'm wondering if that would help digesting, because we know that carbs are digested, the digestion process starts in the mouth, not in the stomach. So I wonder if that would make a big difference. And I suggest that everybody take the time to do that once in a while, because it is very amazing.
Yeah.
Gennad, are there other people who have some comments, questions?
Hello,
Well,
are there other?
I'm gonna have to bail out. So I just wanted to thank you, Gennad, for sponsoring this, and Lenny, thank you for all the work. What you said at the very beginning about the East-West Journal is really true. I mean, it was really one of those macrobiotic enterprises that helped change the way that people felt about not only food, but about their spiritual development and in psychology and poetry and the arts. I mean, I remember the wonderful interviews that you did with Robert Bly, which was
Gary Snyder.
Huh?
Gary Snyder too.
Yeah, yeah. Great. So thanks
you,
everybody. Thank you.
Lenny, would you like to speak about our idea about remarkable people? Yeah.
As Bill said, can you see this book? Can you see the title?
Mm-hmm.
So this was a book that we published. Actually, I happen to have a copy of it here. It was in 1989, and it is a collection of, I don't know, somewhere between 100 and 200 people that had been interviewed, that we interviewed at East-West Journal over the, I left, I think, in 1989, maybe 1990, but Gennad and I had been talking about continuing that avocation, that journalistic enterprise of meetings with remarkable men and women, and establishing a platform through Ganat's generous sponsorship of this forum, and that at least for now, until either I bail out or get bailed out, take the responsibility and the initiative of working with her and with all of you in selecting some of those remarkable men and women who could be subjects and this platform for. There was a TV show years ago that Edward R. Murrow did, where he would interview people in their homes. And if those of you who have seen the biopic about Leonard Bernstein, there's a short snippet of Edward R. Murrow interviewing Leonard Bernstein and his wife in their home. And so this would be something like that we would do a little bit of a preparation prior to the live interview, but that there would be a probing and hopefully complimentary and not challenging interview with everyone from Sylvia and Bill and Martin and Bill Spear, Michael Rossoff, Steve Acuff, Norio Kushi, Fia Kushi, and really find out, no holds barred, challenging them and revealing where they're at, what they've discovered, and what they would like to share. What are the key points, the highlights, and the regrets of their not just macrobiotic life, but their life. And as long-term macrobiotic practitioners, it may have been informed quite a bit by macrobiotic principles, guidelines, discoveries, and failures. So that's something that Ganat and I have discussed, and it's something that, I don't know, your calendar may already have selections of presenters over the next few months, but sometime in the spring that we might launch something like this. And it would be something like meetings with remarkable men and women.
Sylvia writes that there is a book, just a moment, Meetings with Remarkable Men.
That was by Gurdjieff, and that was the inspiration for this book. Yes, we understand. Gurdjieff originated it. It wasn't me. And we give acknowledgement to him and that book in this book. And we can certainly acknowledge them again if you prefer. I think more of Studs Terkel, those of you who know who Studs Terkel was, who interviewed a lot of people in a very kind of lively and immersive method. And he had a radio show and regularly interviews with probably a weekly show with different people, survivors of World War II, people who are working in regular jobs. And this would be people living normal lives, but have something insightful, inspiring, and revealing to share with the world.
Thank you for acknowledging Gurdjieff. I started with his writings in 1967, and I count him as my first mentor and one of the teachers for whom I pray every day. So it's good that you acknowledged him, and it's a great idea to get into the depth of the individuals.
Jane?
Lenny, great minds do indeed think alike. Years ago, after reading Gurdjieff's book, I said, we should have stories called Meetings with Remarkable Macros. And you went ahead and did it, and great. And I hope it does proceed, because there are many. I just wanted to say something more about Micho. I never expected Micho to know everything about science. I never expected Micho to know everything about nutrition and modern approaches to everything. But I found him repeatedly to be very flexible and to change. In fact, the main tenet of macrobiotics is everything changes. I never found him to be rigid. Yes, he had opinions. Yes, he was rooted in traditional foods. There was a generation separation between Micho and the editors of East West Journal and myself. And so naturally, his approach would sound strange in some instances. But I have repeatedly, especially in his latest book, The Macrobiotic Path, which Alex Jack worked with him very closely, to be supported by modern science, to be logical, to be mainstream, approachable. And the main thing to remember is science is always changing. I just read a quote by Isaac Asimov, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, who said, we scientists are always changing. One researcher will come up with some new information and we throw out the old. He said, we're always changing. A case in point, Micho wrote about supplements. Later in life, I worked at the KI for 3 years and I was privy to all this. He said, if you need a supplement, if you're deficient, take a supplement. I know this is different from what he said years ago in the East West Journal, but this would be in the early 90s, 1990s. He said, if you need a supplement, take it, but research what is deficient in your daily diet. Change that. And the goal is to not have to take supplements, but if you need them, take them. And I know he and Aveline were taking, or Aveline particularly was taking blue-green algae, which by the way is extremely high in B12. And they were also changing, experimenting, and they went through evolutions. I saw many evolutions from no citrus to citrus on the plates at the KI. I saw evolutions all the time. And I just want to say that I found Micho to be extremely flexible and, he had the scientific spirit that everything changes. If you learn something better, adopt that. And Lino was like that, always experimenting and trying new things. He was the first guy with blue-green algae. He was the first guy with probiotics. He got laughed out of the macro teachers conference because he dared to mention probiotics. And they said, you want to eat dirt? And it was really funny. Lino was an innovator. And innovators always get criticized. And the old adage about it, first an idea is considered blasphemous and wrong. And then as time goes on, many of these ideas become well accepted. So I think macrobiotics is the way we each create it to be. Every one of you is different and would eat differently and need different grains and different quantities and different amounts of salt. That's to me, the most brilliant part of macrobiotics. It says everyone is unique. If we find our right balance, that's the key. So I just wanted to add those statements. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And while I have you, or Lenny or anybody, we have a question about converted rice, which I'm not sure what that is, and asking thoughts on converted rice. My son is sold on it. Any comments?
All I know is Uncle Ben's made a converted rice, and it was partially boiled, partially steamed, actually dried. And so maybe it was converted in that way. It makes it easy to cook. It cooks much faster. Aveline once told us, but when you're going to go camping and you want to take rice with you, take the rice, wash it, soak it, let it dry in the oven. And so it's partially roasted, and then it'll cook much faster because it's kind of cracked. And I don't know if that's what Uncle Ben's is. And if there's something else about converted rice, I don't know. But I think Uncle Ben's converted rice is partially steamed and then dried so that it cooks faster, but it's white rice. It's not polished rice. I mean, it's 100% polished brown to white.
All right. Anyone else? This has been great. We've had a very good turnout today. 50 people at one point, which is really nice. A very wonderful tribute to Lino and to our speaker, Lenny. I really appreciate. Debbie, you wanted to speak?
I have a question. I'm new to all of this. My nutritionist has wisely guided me to this. In the beginning, the talk about Lino, about how PTSD and doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists couldn't help him, but he found macrobiotics. And I had never before heard any connection between PTSD and macrobiotics. And I was wondering about maybe things I could read about it, or just I was curious to learn more.
Jane?
Well, as you all know, PTSD can not only occur in the battlefield, used to be called shell shock, it can occur in someone's home or on the street if you have a traumatic experience. And it results in many, many different symptoms on a spectrum. I know PTSD victims here at the VA who cannot leave their bedroom. And then I know PTSD victims who function well in society, but perhaps are withdrawn emotionally. So the symptoms are vast. There is a full spectrum. And PTSD, for those of you who don't know, is post-traumatic syndrome.
Stress disorder.
Yeah, and disease. And it's, again, it varies according to the individual. What macrobiotics does, what Whole Foods does, Whole Foods provides the nutrients to strengthen the body and the blood. One of the champion parts of macrobiotics is the quantity of minerals it contains. In addition, it eliminates foods that leach minerals, such as sugar, sodas, refined flours. And therefore, the individual, if they're eating properly, if they're eating carefully and balanced, restores their minerals. Minerals are the building blocks of the nerves, the myelin sheath that covers the nerves, that provides people a more calm projection in life. When the myelin sheath is destroyed by acidic foods, such as sugar, excess animal foods, refined foods, and chemicals, when those are taken away, the myelin sheath, the protection on the nerves, can build up. So we can't go into a long explanation except to say, food creates your blood. The blood creates your cells and your nerves. It can't take away the trauma that someone has been through, but it can help strengthen the individual to endure it, to perhaps even forgive the trauma. It strengthens the mind and body. Bill Terra wrote a book about the emotions and macrobiotics that I would recommend that you read. And in the Macrobiotic Path to Total Health are chapters of how a whole foods diet can restore or help restore mental health. That includes depression and anxiety, which are rampant in this society now. It can help insomnia. And we all know if we don't sleep well, the next day we are not able to function and think as we wish. So insomnia alone can benefit from a healthy diet and lifestyle, and things like acupuncture and exercise. So macrobiotics isn't just diet. It's an entire healthy lifestyle, as healthy as we can be in this current environment. But it can help PTSD. And any improvement in PTSD is beneficial. I believe my husband suffered it in his early life. When he first came to America, his recreation was to go to, I'm going to tell you this, I don't know why I'm doing this, but he used to go to bars down in by the piers and pick fights. He had to get out the aggression that was built up when you're imprisoned by the communists and they're beating you. And the other guys were just happy as can be to fight back. I mean, they used to break chairs over each other's heads. Then they would shake hands and leave the bar. They all had this pent up anger. Could have been from the war, could have been from their fathers. It could have been from injustice. And so PTSD shows up in many ways, and getting it out. Lino also became a carpenter, and hammering and carrying and working physically and sweating is a wonderful way to help those emotions. So I could go on and on. I'm not going to, but Lino and I studied it very much here at the VA. We have the #1 VA in the country, by the way, in Asheville. It's voted year after year as being fabulous. It really is. And they had courses that Lino took on PTSD. So it's something I want to write about in the future. And Lino made many notes. So thank you for your question.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
I'd love to see reference to those books. Maybe I can take a look at that. Thank you so much.
I have a question.
Okay.
I have to go. I appreciate Ganat. You could continue, obviously, as long as you like. But thank you very much,
Okay, then.
everybody, for
Okay, then.
participating. Thanks, Ganat.
You just stay,
So we
Lenny.
thank you,
You just
Lenny.
stay for this one question, please. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I came in a little late, and I knew you were discussing B12. 2 questions briefly. What did Michio say was the answer for B12, deficiency, and also what is currently, the consensus that would be the best ways to provide that B12?
I'm not a doctor, and I'd prefer not giving any recommendations about B12. If you
Not
need
recommendations, just
B12,
experience, whatever. Nobody's going to do what you say necessarily because you're teaching.
I hope not. Everybody has to discover on their own what they need for diet, for nutrition, for making you feel good, as well as enjoying what you eat and how you live your life. So I'm not sure what the current. I don't think there is a current recommendation for anything. Nutritional yeast is certainly one thing that people.
We're not. I'm just curious.
Well,
everybody's
vitamin
here.
B12 supplementation is easy to find at any natural food store or supplement store or online. What Michio recommended when I asked him was basically to not wash your hijiki so much if you're worried about B12 deficiency. And that's all I got for an answer. Other people like Bill, Tara, and other people may have gotten other answers from him. I'm only expressing what I heard from him that seemed to contradict what the reality in the world was as a source of B12 and how to balance out the nutritional deficiency that was caused by a lack of B12 in their diet. And thank you very much for asking. And thanks, Ganat, and for everybody else for attending. I appreciate it and look forward to our future meetings with remarkable people.
Remarkable macros. Thank you so much, Lenny. I super appreciate your time, your knowledge. Thank you for appearing, and thank you very much. We have 2 more questions, Marianne, right, and Sylvia. And then we can decide if that's enough for us or what we do. Also, maybe C. Mike wanted to ask something. So Marion, go ahead.
I just wanted to say for Debbie, the person in the late 70s who was mentoring me in macrobiotics had adopted 2 children who were quite disturbed. And they were on drugs to deal with their disturbances emotionally. And she was macrobiotic, and she fed them macrobiotic foods, got them off drugs. You know, they grew up from, 7 and 9-year-olds to beautifully functioning adults. And that was the way she dealt with, I mean, they had counseling as well, but their food was very much macrobiotics. And that helped them enormously. So I just wanted
Inspiring. Yeah, thank you. And Sylvia, you want the last word?
I wanted to reinforce what Jane said by pointing out that the gut is a critical component of the central nervous system due to the gut-brain axis. And as soon as you change your diet, as soon as you give the microbiome, which has its own demographics of beneficial and pathological citizens, as soon as you change what's fed to them, changes emotion and thinking, and this is documented. And they don't know if the gut initiates things or if it's the brain. That's how close the connection is between the gut and the brain. And you can get an instant change in behaviors, including PTSD, within actually less than a minute. And this isn't because the bacteria or fungi or beneficial viruses and so on have digested the food, but just that they can, quote, smell that it's coming, because they're very, very psychic. They're more psychic than cats and dogs. They can be turned on by smell, activated by smell. They don't even have to be activated by taste. They know their food is coming. And so when we change the good guys and increase the number of good guys in the gut, then it helps with emotions and thinking. And another thing for PTSD, which is very valuable, is the emotional freedom technique called tapping. That's that one. And then on the question about Michio's recommendations in the wake of the vitamin B12 and rickets scandals in Boston and the Netherlands, in the wake of that, in approximately 1987, Michio actually sent a letter out to the teachers. And I do not know where I saved my copy of that letter, but it recommended changes, like it suggested increased use of, quote, sieved grains, such as go to make pasta or flour for babies and little children. It endorsed the use of dairy. And that letter was one of the things which showed me that the vitamin B12 issue was going to be used to radically increase the amount of animal food in the macrobiotic diet. And it was one of the impetuses for me going deep dive, I don't know how many feet down into the vitamin B12 topic for a number of years. So he did send out a letter, and it was to the teachers. But
thank you, Sylvia.
And I want to point out that, well, Lenny gave a list of magazines, but one of the important ones was Michael Rosoff's Macromuse. And that was still being published at the time that the vitamin B12 brouhaha started. Anyway, thank you so much. This has been great.
It always is. It's just consistently. And I'm not saying that from pride, rather from gratitude.
No, it's just a wonderful thing that you're doing for the community.
Norio has joined us as we are about to say adios to each other. So adios, Norio. Jane? Jane saying hi or wants to speak?
No,
Either way,
I'm
it's
I'm
fine.
saying hello and thank you, Knot. I love you.
Great.
I love
Thank you.
when you said Lino's frolicking somewhere. And I love
Yes,
that.
he's expanding. He's
Well, but
expanding.
he's also with you.
I still didn't get,
And he's very
is
much
there-
with me. The soul does not end. And thank you all so much for your comments.
can someone please
Lila,
suggest some B12 sources? You know, if you're eating more vegan macrobiotic.
I'm going to ask that you take that privately. I'm sure, I imagine Sylvia
Why don't
might
you
have something to say.
message me?
Yes. Okay. Because it's we've been going almost 2 hours now. So I appreciate, thank you, and grateful for all of you for coming, sticking, being, participating. Clara, for your help, particularly. Thank you so much. And to everyone, we'll see you in a month. I'll be sending out a recording. ASAP means maybe a week or something. We also have our monthly cooking clutch, we call it, cooking group, where we choose recipes that we want to make, meaning anyone who wants to suggest a recipe or we had an idea of travel food. We had an idea of sauces and dressings. So anyway, we get together the last Sunday of each month, same time, same place. In other words, same Zoom link, same 5 p.m. Israel, 10 a.m. EST, and we cook together. So you're totally welcome. We'd love to have you join us. It's free, of course. And just contact us and you can do that. So good night, goodbye, adios, farewell, sayonara. Happy trails to you until we meet again.
Great seeing Jane.
You
And Clara.
until
And
then,
again.
happy trails to you till we meet
again. Say that to Lino and Sheldon.
That's right.
Bye,
Oh,
everyone.
love to Sheldon.
Love to Lino. Bye-bye.